Studios.
Welcome back to Laughing in the Dark, the podcast where I hang out in haunted places with comedians. This is another fixture in our Sunday Minisode series where I talk to you about your ghost stories. For this Minisode, I spoke to Valerie from Troutdale, Oregon. Valerie told me a crazy story about the wild death of her uncle and some mysterious things that followed. Here's the call.
Hello?
Hi, is this Valerie?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Valerie. This is Sarah calling from Laughing in the Dark. How are you?
I'm fine.
Well, how is your week going so far? I guess it's Monday.
Yeah, it's Monday, but I'm pretty busy during the weekend and on the weekends sometimes too. So.
Oh, man.
But I like it like that though.
Oh, that's good. So you're doing
Yeah.
well. That's good. I find you
yeah.
well this morning.
Oh, good.
And so are you calling from, are you in Troutdale, Oregon?
Yeah, I'm in Troutdale, Oregon. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so you're close by. We're neighbors.
Yeah.
Very good. So I understand you have a ghost story for me. Is that right?
I do, and I've had many experiences, but this is the one I'll tell you about.
This is the most dramatic one?
It's the most significant to me.
Okay.
So yeah, and I think it's extremely interesting. So I think if you don't, if you didn't believe in life after death, I think this might change your mind.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm excited to hear it.
Okay, do you want me to start now?
Sure, yeah, set the scene for us.
Okay. So I had an uncle. His name was Asa Walsh, and he was Irish. He was born in the United States, but his family came from Ireland. And he was born in 1910. He was a very kind of quirky guy. Lived in the wilderness. I lived with him every summer. And he taught me a lot of things. He was from an old pioneer family. And he lived in the woods in a very remote area of Trinity County, California. And if you've never been to Trinity, it's just a solid wilderness pretty much. There are some towns there, but they're very, very small. Mm-hmm. And he lived in the woods, and he would set up like a clearing where he would have all his furniture set out like he was in a house, but he had no cover. And we used to, stay out there in the summer times with him. He was an old gold miner. He panned for gold. He didn't have a job other than panning for gold and turning his gold into some cash. And he would bury it in the wilderness, in the woods. He would bury it in big duffel bags and old cans. And I asked him one time, I said, "Why do you bury your money?" And he said, "Well, I don't trust banks."
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay, he was like an old hermit, and he was drunk all the time. He drank a lot of Irish whiskey.
Oh, okay,
he was
classic.
always drunk, but he was really funny and very knowledgeable because he lived, like I said, off the land. He grew some food and he ate fish out of the river and hunted for wild game, but he never really lived in town. However, he did have a friend that had a tavern in Big Bar, California, and in the back of a little ways back behind the tavern, there was a cabin, and every once in a while he would go there and stay. It was like a one-room cabin. And he would stay there and tend bar for his friend while his friend was out of town. Well, one day he was in the cabin tending, and in the cabin because he was going to tend bar that day. And from what I understand from the people who investigated the death, He died in 1970. They concluded that in order to heat the cabin, there was like an oven, like a stove oven, and you would have to open up the stove and light the pilot and heat the cabin because it didn't have a wood stove per se. So the story was that he went to go. It was probably around 5 o'clock in the morning. He went to go light a cigarette because he was like a chain smoker. He smoked really heavy, and he was going to go light the pilot, and then it apparently, being that he was drunk all the time, apparently he didn't realize that the pilot didn't light on the stove. And so when he went to go light a cigarette,
oh no,
the whole cabin blew up. And this was a log cabin. This was a big, kind of heavy logged cabin, but it was only one room. The whole cabin went up, and all they found of him that was left was a foot.
What?
And that was all that was left.
Not even his head?
His foot. No, nothing, just a foot.
Weird.
So they took this foot, into wherever they take it, to the morgue. And my other aunt and uncle, Pearl and Felix, lived also in the Big Bar area, Weaverville area. And they were members of a church. In fact, I think my Uncle Felix was the deacon of this church. Very small little church, little quaint church, one room, and had the pews in there where you would sit. So it was a small little place, about the size of a bedroom, basically. Mm-hmm. And they decided to take his foot and put his foot in a huge golden casket, full-length golden casket. And this was something that my uncle, knowing my uncle very, very well, that he would not have approved of, because he was, first of all, he wasn't a religious man, but he was spiritual. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't religious. He didn't attend church regularly. So they decided to have this funeral for him in the church. Inviting
Wait, the casket was
members.
Gold?
It was golden colored. Yes, very bright golden color.
Well, isn't it kind of funny that he would bury his gold and he was also buried in gold? Right. Isn't that kind of strange?
I mean, it was very strange. Yes. And so my aunt and Uncle Pearl and Felix were highly religious, and they thought that they were doing the proper thing for my Uncle Asa.
Yeah.
They really seemed that they wanted to do their thing their way, but didn't really take into his consideration that he wasn't religious, and he would probably rather have just had his foot, cremated and sprinkled as whatever ashes were left around the wilderness. That's the kind of person he was.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So what happened after that was when I got to the funeral, in the church, they were having the service in the church and were later going to take him to where they were burying the casket, which I was so upset by the time I got there. I was in tears because of the way the whole funeral was being conducted. Mm-hmm. So I met his son, whose name was Don, who lived in Texas, and by this time he was an adult, I think in his 40s. And I was so upset. I was sitting in the back of the church and just sobbing because I knew that this wasn't what my uncle wanted for, after he died. But I sat through about most of the sermon, and then I got up and I left. And I didn't ask, and I didn't talk to anybody really about where they were going to take him to bury the casket. So I really had no idea. Mm-hmm. I left, and at the time was living in San Francisco Bay Area. So I left and went back down there. Not talking to anybody, not really getting, I didn't know his son. I hadn't seen his son, who lived in Texas. Hadn't seen him since I was like 3 years old. So I really had no contact. So after the funeral and after he got buried, I never really had contact with anybody after that. One day I was at work. This was in the year 2000. I was at work. I came home from work very tired, and I thought, well, I'm going to sit on the bed for a while and watch some TV. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I like some gospel music sometimes. So I don't know if you know or used to know where the TVN radio TV station used to be in Portland.
No.
Okay. So I turned on that channel, and I was sitting at the end of the bed, and I was watching this concert. And it was a concert of Jeff Stenhole and Alvin Slaughter, who were these two gospel singers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching it, and I was really getting into the music, and all of a sudden, this voice came over the TV. Over everybody singing. They were still singing, and this voice started talking. I thought, what the heck is this? I thought maybe it was radio or TV interference or something.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and this voice comes on, and the voice sounded very familiar to me. I was like, I've never heard that voice before. Where's that voice? The voice kept talking a little bit, and it wasn't really like a conversation. The voice was saying, I want you to come down and visit me. I realized at that time that the voice was my Uncle Asa.
Weird.
I said, I said, I kind of, I was like, what, am I really tired? Am I nuts?
Yeah.
What's going on, I was questioning myself. So this voice again said, I want you to come down and visit me. Well, being the weird sense of humor that I have, I talked back to the voice and I said, but you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
How can I come down and visit you?
Mm-hmm.
The voice said once again, I want you to come down and visit me. Come down on May 14th. Well, that was about 30 days or so before, that I was listening to this voice. It said, come down on May 14th. So I said, oh, okay. I said, I'll see what I can do. Kind of, snarky and sarcastic.
Yeah.
And so I went to work the next day and I asked my boss for some time off. I said, I need to go down to California. So he said, okay, that's fine. So I came back home, and about a week before I was supposed to leave, I was watching TV again, same channel, same kind of music, same concert people. The voice came back over the TV and said, don't come down on the 14th. I need you to come down on the 21st.
What?
And I said, yeah. So I said, well, I've already made arrangements.
Right.
Talking to the voice out loud.
You're like, don't be a pain in the ass about this.
Yeah, really. Really. I said, okay, I'll see what I can do, kind of sarcastically. And, so I went back and I had changed the time with my boss, and he said, that's fine.
You're like, sorry, my TV says that I gotta. And he's like, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
You definitely need the time off, so we're going to just go with it.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And get a checkup while you're at it, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I got a hold of my daughter, who at the time, she's an adult. So I got a hold of her, and I had my grandson with me. And I said, we're going to take a trip down to California. And I told her what was going on. And she's like, okay. So, well, she's very intuitive, too. Mm-hmm. So she kind of sides with stuff that I believe in. So now we took a trip down to California. Well, what I decided to do was, instead of coming down on the 21st, to come down on the 20th, get a motel, stay in the motel, and then the next morning get up, have breakfast, and go look to see if we could find out where he's buried. So we thought maybe he was buried in the family cemetery, because we did have a private little cemetery, but that was out past Big Bar in Price Creek. And I thought, well, let's go to the funeral homes first, and let's see what we can find out. So the first funeral home we went to, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 we could have chose from. The first one we went to was called McDonald's Funeral Home, and that was in Weaverville, California. So we drove around to the back of the building where there was like an office door, parked in the parking lot right by the office door, and I walked up and knocked on the door. It opens this little short lady who says, may I help you? And I told her I'm looking to see if you could give me some information about where Asa Walsh might be buried. And she said, well, hold on a minute. Let me go get Mr. McDonald. So she went and got him, that he's the owner of the building. And I told him why I was there. I thought, well, maybe the guy will think I'm really off my rocker, but I'm going to tell him why I'm there.
Yeah.
He stood there and he stared at me for the longest time at this door. It seemed like it went on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And this, and he just, I thought this man's going to think I'm flipping nuts and ask me to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, look over to your right, up against the building on the sidewalk. He says, I just got this 5 minutes before you drove up. I went over and I looked at this object. It was a granite headstone for my uncle with his name on it, with his picture, and with a little icon where he was, a gold miner with gold panning in the river. Mm-hmm. This was all carved on this headstone.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, where did this come from? He said, well, it was ordered by his son because he wanted to get headstones for all of the family members who didn't have them that were buried up here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow. I said, and you just got this? He said, yeah, 5 minutes before you drove up. He said it was supposed to be ready. Remember the date that I told you, the first date was May 14th.
Oh, my God.
He said it was supposed to be delivered on the 14th, but the man who was carving it couldn't finish it in time because he got ill.
Mm.
So I was like, wait a minute here. I had told Mr. McDonald the whole story, and he was just flabbergasted. He said, well, he says, I guess that does prove that maybe there is something else after you die. There is communication somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to he told me that they were going to set the headstone at noon. So I went up there at 1:00 and they had set the headstone, and I sat on the grave and I talked to him for a long time, but I never got any reply back, and I haven't heard any of his voices since then. But just to have had that experience,
what a strange.
Told me there is something else out there. Know what. I don't know how many people have ever had that experience and just poo-pooed it, just like, oh, and, they may have had some other kind of things like that. And I have had other things from other family members similar to something like that, but, not exactly. So that was it.
Were your other experiences through a TV or some kind of an electronic like that too?
No. After my father passed away, there was knocking. My husband even heard it. Mm-hmm. Was knocking on walls, on doors, flower pots that were hanging from the ceiling, swinging out and then slamming back onto the walls, things like that. So kind of strange little things. But the one with the voice, that my uncle Asa, that was the most significant experience.
Yeah, it is interesting because I don't know if I've heard. I've had some other ghost story calls from season 1 about. There was one ghost story call that was a voice that came through the TV actually, and it was there was like static on the TV, very poltergeist, and but for me, like when my dad died, I've had like a couple visits in dreams. Oh
yeah.
So and that's the closest thing. I've never heard his voice. Yeah. That would be cool.
I had a ritual dream after my dad passed away. A couple of weeks after he passed away. So I had a ritual dream of his. I don't know if you want to hear that one, but
well, let's see. I've got a little bit of time if you want to tell it.
Okay. So the ritual dream was I was at one of those pools. Looks like a public pool. It's a big Olympic-sized public pool.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting on the bleacher because I had gotten a letter in the mail that said, "We want you to come to celebrate your father, and we're going to have the celebration at the pool."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but it was a pool. But water has some significance.
Oh my God! Wait,
rituals.
This is. I'm sorry to cut you off, but one of my dreams with my dad too, shortly after he died, was that it was like a neighborhood pool party.
Mm-hmm.
And we were drinking out of Solo cups, just talking. But I've never had anyone connect that to something else. So what was the ritual? What was the symbol? What's the symbolization with the pool?
Well, water is very significant. It is, part of our earth, and it's a cleansing. It's like a cleansing ritual. Water symbolizes cleansing.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the pool, they had him wrapped like a mummy, and they had him floating in the pool, and they filled the pool up with suds, soap suds.
Yeah.
And I was to get in the pool and, float my father with my hands underneath him in a circle. And so I got in the pool and I put my hands underneath him and I floated him in circles several times. There wasn't any talking or any ritual sayings. It was just to do that. And everybody was sitting, the whole place was full of people, and they were sitting in the bleachers. Mm-hmm. And they had, first, one thing I did skip is they had him come down it was like a slide, like a straight slide that came into the pool. And they slid him down into the water, into the soap. And then I was in the pool, and I was circling the pool with him in it, underneath, holding him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically the whole end of the dream. I still don't today quite understand the whole significance of that, other than it could have been that my father had many, many illnesses throughout his life, was raised in an orphanage in Texas, lost his mother at a very young age, and maybe I needed and he needed this cleansing.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I can think of that it could have been. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's such strong imagery,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because my father, as a child and as an adult, suffered for a very long time with illnesses. He had TB, I think twice, was raised in an orphanage and had to literally eat garbage in order to survive.
Yeah.
And lost his mother in a tornado. And I know he told me a lot of stories about this tornado event and how he was only 3 years old and he remembered it so vividly. And then as an adult had kidney failure and some more illnesses, was always underweight, not a very healthy person, and then ended up dying of bone cancer. So it was very significant. I think I also needed that cleansing ritual because I took care of my dad for 10 years while he had cancer. And so all of that cleansing, I think, was very important.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably why that event, that dream event happened. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for your call, Valerie. This was such a crazy story. Do you have a ghost story that you want to tell us on Laughing in the Dark? Email us at litdarkpodcast@gmail.com or write to us in our Contact Us forum on our website, litdarkpodcast.com. we may want to feature you on the show. Thanks so much for listening.
Carnival Studios.